She stood beside her husband at the most luxurious party of the year, but he introduced her as nobody. Then, a billionaire CEO walked across the room, looked into her eyes, and whispered, "I've been searching for you." What happened next changed everything. Imagine walking into a room where everyone knows your husband's name, but nobody knows yours. Imagine standing beside the person who promised to love you forever, only to realize that he is doing everything possible to make sure the world never sees you. The room is filled with laughter, the lights are shining, the richest and most influential people in the city are celebrating together. But in the middle of that glamorous evening, one woman is standing alone, feeling like she has disappeared. And the most painful part is not that strangers ignore her. The most painful part is that the man standing only a few feet away from her is the person who chose to make her invisible, her own husband. But what happened next was something nobody in that room expected. A powerful CEO, a man who had spent decades building an empire and whose name was recognized around the world, suddenly stopped in the middle of the crowd. His eyes locked onto the woman standing quietly in the corner, and after years of searching for someone he thought he had lost forever, he walked toward her and whispered, "Emily, I've been searching for you." Why would a billionaire CEO be searching for a woman who had vanished from his life decades ago? Why did he recognize her when the man who claimed to love her no longer wanted anyone to know she existed? And what secret from their past was powerful enough to bring two people back together after so many years? Welcome to At When Family Breaks One. Here, we uncover the hidden stories behind broken relationships, family struggles, and the emotional moments that reveal what people truly feel behind closed doors. Before we continue with Emily's story, if you enjoy powerful human stories that make you think deeper about love, family, and the choices that shape our lives, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating more meaningful stories for you. Now, let me take you back to the night when everything changed. The event was one of the most exclusive charity galas in the city. It was the kind of place where every detail represented success. The grand entrance, the expensive jewelry, the carefully chosen words, the confident smiles of people who had spent years building their careers and reputations. Everyone inside that ballroom had a place. Everyone seemed important. Everyone seemed seen. Except Emily Carter. For many people looking at her from the outside, Emily appeared to have the perfect life. She was married to Richard Carter, a successful businessman with influence, wealth, and a respected name. People admired him. They listened when he spoke. They wanted to be connected to him. And for years, many believed Emily was lucky. They saw the beautiful house. They saw the elegant vacations. They saw the photographs where she stood beside Richard with a smile on her face. But photographs never tell the entire story. They never reveal the quiet moments when someone feels alone. They never reveal the conversations that slowly disappear. They never reveal how a person can slowly lose their voice while still remaining in the same relationship. That night, Emily entered the ballroom believing she would finally be part of Richard's world. She had spent years supporting him. She had attended events when he needed her. She had stood beside him through difficult times. She had helped create the image of a successful family. And perhaps, deep inside, she hoped that this evening would be different. Maybe tonight, Richard would look at her with pride. Maybe tonight, he would introduce her not as someone standing behind him, but as the woman who had been beside him all along. But the moment they entered the room, something happened. Richard slowly removed his hand from hers. At first, Emily ignored it. She told herself he was simply distracted. There were many people to greet, many conversations to have, many important names in the room. But as the night continued, she began to notice a painful pattern. Richard introduced his business partners. He introduced his friends. He introduced people he barely knew. But when someone asked about Emily, he hesitated. And then he said something that she would never forget. "She's a friend." A friend. Those two words seemed small, almost meaningless. But sometimes the smallest words can reveal the deepest wounds. Because Emily was not a friend. She was his wife. The woman who had shared years of her life with him. The woman who knew his struggles before the world knew his success. The woman who had sacrificed pieces of herself so that he could become the person everyone admired. Yet, inside that crowded ballroom, she suddenly felt like a stranger. And that feeling is something many people understand. Because not all heartbreak comes from someone leaving. Sometimes heartbreak comes from staying beside someone who slowly stops seeing you. A person can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. A person can be loved in appearance but forgotten emotionally. And sometimes the hardest question is not, why did they leave me? The hardest question is, when did they stop seeing me? Emily stood near the edge of the room, quietly watching Richard move from conversation to conversation. He was confident. He was respected. He looked like a man who had everything. But Emily knew the truth behind the image. She knew the years of silence. She knew the moments when her opinions were dismissed. She knew what it felt like to become less visible inside her own marriage. The tragedy was that this did not happen overnight. People rarely lose themselves in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly. A dream postponed. A feeling ignored. A conversation avoided. A compromise made again and again until one day a person looks in the mirror and wonders, who am I now? Emily had spent years becoming what everyone expected her to be, a supportive wife, a perfect partner, a woman who never caused problems. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten the woman she used to be. The woman with dreams, the woman with confidence, the woman who believed she deserved to be loved completely. And then, in the middle of that night, something unexpected happened. While Emily believed nobody noticed her, someone did. Across the ballroom, a man suddenly stopped speaking. He looked toward her as if he had seen a ghost from another lifetime. At first, Emily did not notice. She was too focused on disappearing, but the man kept looking. Not with curiosity, not with politeness, with recognition, with emotion. Then he began walking toward her, slowly, purposefully. And as he came closer, Emily felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen. The man standing in front of her was Alexander Hayes, a name that carried power throughout the business world, a successful CEO, a man admired by thousands. But to Emily, he was not the billionaire everyone knew. He was the person from a different chapter of her life. The person who knew her before she became someone else's shadow. The person who remembered the woman she had been. And when Alexander finally spoke, the words that came from him would open a door Emily thought had been closed forever. Emily, I've been searching for you. At that moment, she realized this night was not just about a party. It was not just about her husband refusing to acknowledge her. It was about a past that had never truly disappeared. A love that had never received its final answer. And a truth that was about to change everything she believed about her own life. The night when Alexander Hayes walked back into Emily's life did not begin with a promise of a new future. It began by forcing her to finally confront the painful truth about the life she had been living for years. Because before someone can discover what they truly want, they first have to understand what they have lost. And for Emily, that realization started with looking back at the marriage that everyone thought was perfect. From the outside, Emily and Richard Carter had everything people admired. A beautiful home, financial stability, a respected family name, a life surrounded by comfort and opportunity. To their friends, they represented success. They were the couple who had built a life together and reached a level many people dreamed of achieving. But what people saw was only the surface. Behind closed doors, Emily slowly began to realize that a comfortable life could still feel incredibly lonely. And that is the part of Emily's story that stayed with me the most. Because when we talk about broken relationships, we often look for one dramatic moment. We search for the obvious reason, the argument, the betrayal. the event that changed everything. But sometimes, relationships do not collapse because of one terrible day. Sometimes they fade through thousands of quiet moments where two people slowly stop understanding each other. And that was what happened between Emily and Richard. When they first met, Richard was not the cold person everyone would later see. He was passionate, driven, focused on creating a better future. Emily admired that side of him. She saw a man with dreams, a man who wanted to build something meaningful. And in those early years, she believed that his ambition was something they would share together. She imagined they would grow together. She imagined they would celebrate each other's victories. She imagined that no matter how successful Richard became, they would always remain partners. But success has a way of revealing what already exists inside a person. For some people, success creates more generosity, more appreciation, more gratitude. But for others, success can slowly create distance. Richard became increasingly focused on how the world viewed him, his reputation, his influence, his position. The image he created became something he protected at all costs. And without realizing it, Emily began feeling less like his partner and more like a supporting character in his story. At first, she ignored the signs. She told herself that every marriage had difficult seasons. She told herself that Richard was under pressure. She told herself that successful people often had demanding lives. And maybe those things were true. But there is a difference between understanding someone's struggles and constantly sacrificing yourself to make those struggles easier for them. Emily started making sacrifices that seemed small at first. She changed her schedule around his. She adjusted her opinions to avoid unnecessary arguments. She stopped bringing up certain topics because she already knew they would become disagreements. And slowly, something happened that many people experience but rarely talk about. She became quieter. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she no longer felt certain that anyone was truly listening. I think this is one of the most painful parts of Emily's journey. The loss of herself did not happen because someone forced her to disappear overnight. It happened because, little by little, she learned to make herself smaller. She learned to avoid conflict. She learned to prioritize peace over honesty. She learned to put everyone else's comfort before her own feelings. And after years of doing that, she began confusing silence with happiness. But silence and peace are not always the same thing. Sometimes silence is simply the place where unspoken pain hides. Emily had become the person everyone depended on. The supportive wife, the understanding woman, the person who always knew how to keep everything together. But the question nobody asked was, who was taking care of Emily? Who noticed when she was tired? Who asked about her dreams? Who reminded her that she was more than the role she played in someone else's life? These questions are important because Emily's story is not only about a husband who failed to appreciate his wife. It is also about a woman who slowly forgot to appreciate herself. Many people believe losing yourself happens through a major tragedy, but often, it happens through ordinary moments repeated for years. A dream you stop chasing, an opinion you stop sharing, a passion you stop pursuing, a part of yourself you keep hiding because you believe it will make life easier. And one day, you wake up and realize you have become a stranger to yourself. That was where Emily found herself. She was living a life that looked successful, but deep inside, she felt disconnected from the person she used to be. The woman before the marriage, the woman before expectations, the woman before she learned to measure her worth through someone else's approval. And perhaps that is why Alexander's appearance affected her so deeply. Because Alexander did not just represent a person from her past, he represented a version of Emily that she thought was gone forever. Before Richard, before the responsibilities, before she became careful with every word and every decision. Emily had once been someone who believed anything was possible, and Alexander had known that woman. Years earlier, before his name became recognized in the business world, Alexander Hayes was simply a young man who saw something special in Emily. He did not see her as someone's future wife. He did not see her as a decoration beside him. He did not care about how others viewed her. He saw her thoughts, her kindness, her personality, the small details that made her different. And perhaps the most powerful thing about Alexander was that around him, Emily never felt like she had to prove that she was worthy of love. She could simply exist. She could laugh. She could dream. She could be herself. But life separated them. Not because their connection disappeared, not because they stopped caring. Sometimes people lose each other because circumstances, timing, and choices create a distance that feels impossible to cross. And Emily made a choice that changed the direction of her entire life. A choice she believed was the right one at the time. A choice influenced by expectations, pressure, and the belief that she was choosing security over uncertainty. But decades later, standing across from Alexander at that charity gala, Emily was forced to face something she had avoided for years. The question was no longer about the past. The question was about the present. Was she truly happy? Was the life she built truly the life she wanted? Or had she spent years protecting a life that no longer protected her? Because sometimes the hardest moment in life is not when someone else stops seeing us. It is when we finally realize we stopped seeing ourselves. And that was the beginning of Emily's journey. Not a journey to find another person, not a journey to return to the past, but a journey to rediscover the woman she had been before the world convinced her to become someone else. I need to continue Emily's story from the moment she was forced to look back at the life she had built. Because sometimes the person who returns from our past does not come back to change our future. They come back to reveal the truth we have been avoiding. For Emily, seeing Alexander Hayes again was not simply a surprise. It was a reminder of a time when she was not afraid to dream. A reminder of a version of herself that existed before she learned to hide her feelings, before she learned to accept being overlooked, and before she convinced herself that being needed was the same as being loved. But the question that remained was simple and painful. Why did Alexander search for her after all these years? Why did a man who had achieved everything the world could offer still carry the memory of one woman from his past? To understand that, we have to return to the beginning of their story. Long before Alexander Hayes became the powerful CEO standing in that ballroom, he was simply a young man trying to build a future. He was not surrounded by wealth. He did not have the influence he had today. He did not have people waiting for his attention or businesses seeking his approval. He was just Alexander. And during that time, Emily was not the quiet woman standing alone at a charity event. She was someone completely different. She was curious. She was hopeful. She believed life was full of possibilities. She had dreams that were not connected to anyone else's expectations. And that was the woman Alexander fell in love with. What made their relationship special was not that they lived a perfect life. They did not. They had challenges. They had uncertainty. They had moments when they did not know what the future would bring. But what they had was something Emily would later realize she had been missing for decades. They truly saw each other. Alexander listened when Emily spoke. Not because he had to, because he wanted to understand her. He remembered the small details, the things most people ignored. The way she smiled when she talked about things she loved. The way she cared about people even when she received nothing in return. The way she could find happiness in simple moments. To Alexander, Emily was never someone who needed to become more impressive. She was already enough. And perhaps that is what made losing him so painful. Because when someone loves you for who you truly are, losing that connection can feel like losing a part of yourself. But life does not always separate people because they stop loving each other. Sometimes life separates people because they are standing in the middle of circumstances they do not know how to overcome. And that was exactly what happened to Emily and Alexander. Their future together was not destroyed by a lack of feelings. It was influenced by choices, pressure, fear, and expectations from the people around them. At that time, Emily faced a difficult reality. Her family believed security mattered more than uncertainty. They believed a stable future was more important than following her heart. They saw Richard as the safer choice, a successful man, a respected man, someone who could provide the kind of life many people considered ideal. And slowly, Emily found herself standing between two different paths. One path represented love, uncertainty, and a future she could not predict. The other represented comfort, approval, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. Like many people facing difficult decisions, Emily did not choose based only on what she wanted. She chose based on what she believed she was supposed to do. And that decision changed everything. Years passed. The world moved forward. Alexander built his career. He faced failures. He experienced challenges. He worked harder than anyone expected. And eventually, he became the person everyone recognized. A successful entrepreneur, a respected leader, a man whose name carried power. But despite all those achievements, there was one unanswered question that stayed with him. What happened to Emily? Did she find happiness? Did she build the life she wanted? Did she ever think about the dreams they once shared? Because some memories do not disappear simply because time passes. Some people leave a mark on our lives that success cannot erase. And for Alexander, Emily was that person. But what makes this story more meaningful is that Alexander was not searching for Emily because he wanted to reclaim the past. He was not trying to erase the years that had passed. He was not looking for a fantasy version of the woman he remembered. He wanted to know one thing. Was she happy? That question says more about love than many people realize. Because real love is not always about possession. It is not about saying, "You belong to me." Sometimes real love is simply caring enough to wonder, "Are you okay? Did life treat you kindly? Did you become the person you always wanted to be?" And when Alexander finally saw Emily again at that event, he immediately understood something was wrong. He saw the expensive dress. He saw the elegant appearance. He saw the woman everyone else might have considered successful. But he also saw something deeper. He saw the sadness behind her smile. He saw the hesitation in her eyes. He saw someone who had spent years becoming smaller. And perhaps that was the moment Alexander realized that the woman he had been searching for was not the same woman he remembered. Life had changed her. Marriage had changed her. Years of putting others first had changed her. But underneath all of that, he could still see Emily, the same person he once knew, the same person who had once believed she deserved happiness, the same person who had once looked at the future with hope. And that is why his words affected her so deeply. "I've been searching for you." Those words were not only about finding a person, they were about finding a connection that time had failed to erase. They were about acknowledging that someone, somewhere, still remembered her. Not as Richard's wife, not as a symbol of success, not as someone standing in the background, but as Emily, a person with dreams, a person with feelings, a person who mattered. However, this moment also created a difficult question. Because finding someone from your past does not automatically fix your present. Emily could not simply erase decades of her life. She could not pretend the choices she made never happened. She could not ignore the responsibilities and relationships she had built. The appearance of Alexander did not give her an easy answer. Instead, it forced her to ask harder questions. Was she living a life chosen by her own heart? Or was she simply continuing a life that others expected her to accept? Had she stayed because she was truly happy? Or had she stayed because leaving felt impossible? These are questions many people avoid because they require honesty. And honesty is not always comfortable. Sometimes the hardest truths are not about what someone else did to us. Sometimes the hardest truths are about what we allowed ourselves to accept for too long. Emily spent years believing she had made the right decision. And perhaps, at that time, she had. Because people make choices with the information, emotions, and circumstances they have in that moment. But life has a way of bringing forgotten questions back to us. And Alexander's return became that question. A question Emily could no longer ignore. Who was she before she became someone everyone else needed her to be? What dreams had she abandoned? What parts of herself had she buried? And most importantly, was it still possible to find them again? Because sometimes the person who comes back into our life is not there to give us something new. Sometimes they are there to remind us of something we lost. And for Emily Carter, Alexander Hayes was not simply the man from her past. He was the mirror that showed her a truth she had avoided for years. She was still there. The real Emily was still there. She had just been waiting for someone, even herself, to finally see her again. The return of Alexander Hayes did not immediately give Emily the answers she had been searching for. Instead, it forced her to face the questions she had spent years avoiding. And sometimes, the most difficult battles are not between two people. They are the battles we fight inside ourselves when we finally realize we can no longer ignore the truth. For the first time in many years, Emily had someone looking at her and remembering the woman she used to be. But now she had to decide something much harder. Would she continue living as the person everyone expected her to be? Or would she finally allow herself to become the person she was always meant to be? That question followed her long after the night at the gala ended. Because the truth is, seeing Alexander again did not erase the years Emily had spent with Richard. It did not erase the memories. It did not erase the responsibilities. And it certainly did not erase the complicated emotions that come with realizing your life may not be what you once believed it was. For years, Emily had convinced herself that sacrifice was simply part of love. She believed that being a good wife meant understanding more than being understood. She believed that keeping a family together sometimes meant putting your own feelings aside. And in many ways, that belief came from a good place. Emily was not someone who gave up easily. She was loyal. She was patient. She believed in commitment. Those qualities were not weaknesses. They were the qualities that allowed her to stand beside Richard through years of challenges. But somewhere along the way, something important had been lost. Emily had confused enduring with being fulfilled. She had confused responsibility with happiness. And she had confused being needed with being loved. After the gala, she began looking at her life differently. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with a kind of painful honesty she had never allowed herself before. She started remembering all the moments she had ignored. The moments when Richard made decisions without considering her opinion. The moments when her feelings were treated as inconveniences. The moments when she wanted to speak but chose silence because she thought avoiding conflict was easier. And the more she remembered, the more she understood something important. The problem was never just one night at a party. The problem was not only that Richard failed to introduce her. That moment was simply the reflection of something that had existed for years. A relationship where one person had slowly become more visible, while the other slowly disappeared. And this is where I think Emily's story becomes something much deeper than a story about a marriage. Because many people believe losing yourself happens when someone takes something away from you. But sometimes, losing yourself happens when you keep giving pieces of yourself away because you believe that is the price of keeping peace. A little less honesty, a little less confidence, a little less of your own dreams. Until one day, you realize you have built a life where everyone knows your role, but almost nobody knows you. That realization was painful for Emily, but it was also the beginning of change. Because awareness is often the first step toward freedom. For the first time, Emily stopped asking, "How can I make this marriage work?" And she started asking, "What kind of life do I truly want?" Those questions are frightening because they require courage. It is much easier to continue a familiar life, even an unhappy one, than to face uncertainty. The unknown can be terrifying. Starting over can be terrifying. Admitting that something is wrong after investing decades into it can feel impossible. But staying somewhere only because you are afraid of leaving is not the same as choosing to stay. And Emily was beginning to understand the difference. Meanwhile, Richard noticed the change. Not because he suddenly understood everything, not immediately, but because Emily was no longer reacting the way she used to. For years, Richard had become comfortable with a certain version of Emily. The woman who agreed, the woman who adjusted, the woman who stayed quiet. He knew how to interact with that Emily. But the woman standing in front of him now was different. She was still kind, still calm, still thoughtful. But there was something he had not seen in a long time: confidence. And sometimes, when someone stops allowing themselves to be overlooked, the people around them begin to notice the difference. Richard began questioning why Emily seemed distant, why she no longer looked for his approval, why she seemed more interested in understanding herself than maintaining an image. But Emily was not changing to punish him. She was not trying to make him feel guilty. She was not seeking revenge. She was simply trying to find herself again. And that distinction matters, because healing is not about making someone else suffer. Healing is about no longer allowing your own life to be controlled by pain. During this period, Alexander remained careful. He did not come into Emily's life demanding answers. He did not pressure her to choose him. He did not act as though their past gave him ownership over her future. And that was one of the reasons Emily trusted him. Because the Alexander she remembered was still there. The man who saw her. The man who respected her choices. The man who understood that love was not about controlling another person. It was about giving them the freedom to be themselves. Their conversations were not about escaping reality. They were about understanding it. They talked about the years they had missed, the dreams they once had, the choices that shaped their lives. And slowly, Emily began realizing something. Alexander had not returned to rescue her. He had returned to remind her that she was capable of rescuing herself. That difference changed everything. Because for years, Emily had believed she needed someone else to make her feel valuable. But she was beginning to understand that her value had never disappeared. It had simply been ignored. The most powerful moment of transformation came when Emily finally confronted Richard. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with honesty. She asked the questions she had carried inside for years. Why had he stopped seeing her? Why had her voice become less important? Why did their marriage become more about appearances than connection? And for the first time, Emily did not soften her words to protect someone else's comfort. She spoke as herself, the woman she had buried for years. The conversation was not easy, because honesty rarely is. Richard struggled to accept what he was hearing. From his perspective, he had provided everything: a home, security, a comfortable life. He believed those things proved his love. But Emily helped him understand something he had forgotten. Love is not only what you provide. Love is also how you make someone feel. A person can have every material comfort in the world and still feel emotionally abandoned. A person can live in a beautiful house and still feel homeless inside their own relationship. That was the truth Emily needed Richard to understand. And perhaps it was the truth many people need to understand. Relationships are not only built through grand gestures, they are built through daily moments. A conversation, a moment of appreciation, a willingness to listen, a decision to see the person beside you. Because the people we love do not only need our presence, they need our attention, they need our respect, they need to know they matter. As Emily stood in that moment, she finally understood something that changed her entire perspective. Her greatest mistake was not loving Richard. Her greatest mistake was believing she had to disappear in order to be loved. And that realization gave her a strength she had forgotten existed. She no longer needed to prove her worth. She no longer needed to beg to be noticed. She no longer needed to measure herself through someone else's eyes. For the first time in years, Emily was choosing herself. Not because she stopped caring about others, not because she became selfish, but because she finally understood that a person cannot give love freely when they have completely abandoned themselves. And this was the moment Emily's life truly began to change. Not because a powerful CO returned, Not because someone from her past offered her another chance, but because she finally gave herself permission to believe that her own happiness mattered. The woman who once stood silently in the corner of a crowded room was no longer invisible. She had found her voice again. And now, she had to decide what came next. Would she continue holding on to a life built around expectations, or would she finally step into a future built around truth? Because sometimes the hardest decision in life is not choosing between two people. Sometimes the hardest decision is choosing between the person you have become and the person you still have the courage to become. The moment Emily finally chose to face the truth was not the end of her journey. It was the beginning of the most important decision of her life. Because discovering that you have been living a life that no longer feels like your own is painful. But knowing what to do after that discovery is even harder. And for Emily, the greatest challenge was not choosing between Richard and Alexander. The greatest challenge was learning how to choose herself. After years of putting everyone else first, Emily had finally reached a point where she could no longer ignore the question that had been quietly waiting inside her heart. If I continue living this way, will I still recognize myself years from now? That question stayed with her. Because sometimes life does not change because of one dramatic event. Sometimes it changes because one person finally becomes honest with themselves. And that honesty can be both frightening and freeing. Emily's story was never simply about a woman who was forgotten by her husband or rediscovered by someone from her past. It was about something much deeper. It was about identity, about dignity, about the moment when someone realizes that love should never require them to disappear. Looking back, Emily understood something she had never fully accepted before. Richard was not the only person responsible for the distance that had grown between them. Yes, his choices had hurt her. Yes, his inability to see her had created wounds that lasted for years. But Emily also had to acknowledge her own role. She had ignored her own feelings. She had accepted silence when she wanted to speak. She had convinced herself that sacrificing her happiness was the same as protecting her marriage. And this realization was difficult. Because it is always easier to point at someone else's mistakes than to examine our own choices. But true growth begins when we stop asking only, "Who hurt me?" and we start asking, "What can I learn from what happened to me?" That was the difference between staying trapped in pain and moving forward. Emily was no longer trying to rewrite her past. She knew she could not go back and make different decisions. She could not erase the years she spent trying to be the perfect wife. She could not change the moments when she stayed quiet. But she could decide what the rest of her life would look like. And that decision became the most powerful moment of her transformation. For the first time in years, Emily began rebuilding a relationship with herself. She started remembering the things she loved before life became only about responsibilities. The books she used to read, the places she wanted to visit, the dreams she once considered too unrealistic, the interests she abandoned because they did not fit into someone else's plan. She began understanding that the woman she used to be was not gone. She was simply waiting for Emily to stop apologizing for having needs, waiting for Emily to stop feeling guilty for wanting happiness, waiting for Emily to remember that she was a person before she was a wife. And perhaps this is the most important lesson hidden inside her story. Many people spend years searching for someone who will finally appreciate them, someone who will understand them, someone who will make them feel valuable. But sometimes the first person who needs to recognize our worth is ourselves. Because when we depend completely on others to define our value, we give them control over something they were never supposed to own: our identity, our confidence, our sense of self. Alexander understood this better than anyone. That was why he never asked Emily to leave her life for him. He never told her that their past gave him a right to her future. He never acted as if his feelings mattered more than hers. Instead, he gave her something she had been missing for years: space, respect, a chance to decide for herself. And maybe that was the reason his presence affected her so deeply. Because after years of feeling controlled by expectations, she finally experienced someone who did not try to control her choices. Someone who simply wanted her to be happy, whether that happiness included him or not. That kind of love is often misunderstood. People sometimes think love means holding on to someone no matter what. But real love is not about possession. It is about respect. It is about wanting the best for another person, even when the outcome is uncertain. And that was something Emily had to learn. She had spent so much time trying to earn love that she forgot love was never supposed to feel like a reward she had to achieve. It was supposed to feel like a place where she could be fully herself. As time passed, Emily's relationship with Richard reached a point where both of them had to confront reality. Not the reality they showed others, not the image they had protected for years. The real one. The one where two people had slowly become strangers. Their conversations became more honest. They talked about the years they had lost. They talked about the moments they failed each other. They talked about the things they never said, because they were afraid of what would happen if they finally spoke the truth. And those conversations were painful. Because sometimes honesty reveals wounds that have been hidden for too long. But honesty also creates the possibility of healing. Whether two people stay together or choose different paths, healing cannot happen without truth. A relationship cannot become stronger when both people are pretending everything is fine. And Emily finally understood that protecting a relationship does not mean protecting an illusion. It means having the courage to face reality. That was something Richard had to learn as well. For years, he believed that providing a comfortable life was enough. He believed success was proof of love. He believed that because he worked hard and gave his family security, he had fulfilled his role. But Emily helped him see something he had overlooked. People do not only remember what you give them, they remember how you make them feel. They remember whether they felt heard, whether they felt respected, whether they felt important. A person can receive everything material and still feel emotionally empty. And sometimes the person standing closest to you is the person you stop noticing first. That was Richard's mistake. He became so focused on building a successful life that he forgot to nurture the relationship inside that life. But perhaps the most meaningful part of this story is that Emily did not need Richard to become a completely different person in order to become whole again. Her healing could not depend on his apology. Her confidence could not depend on his approval. Her future could not depend on whether someone finally chose her. Because Emily had finally chosen herself. And that changed everything. The woman who once stood quietly in the corner of a crowded room was no longer waiting for someone else to recognize her. She recognized herself. She understood that being loved by another person is beautiful. But knowing your own worth is essential. Because when you know who you are, you no longer accept relationships that require you to become less. You no longer confuse attention with love. You no longer mistake sacrifice without appreciation for commitment. You begin to understand that a healthy relationship is not built by one person disappearing so another person can shine. It is built by two people who allow each other to grow. And that is why Emily's story stays with us. Because almost everyone has experienced moments when they felt unseen. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not in a marriage. Maybe in a friendship. Maybe in a family relationship. Maybe even within ourselves. There are moments when we wonder if our feelings matter, if our dreams matter, if anyone truly notices the person behind the role we play. But Emily's journey reminds us of something important. Being unseen by others does not mean you are invisible. Being forgotten by someone does not mean you are forgettable. And losing yourself for a period of time does not mean you can never find yourself again. Sometimes the greatest comeback is not proving something to the people who underestimated you. Sometimes the greatest comeback is quietly returning to yourself. Years after that unforgettable night, Emily looked back at the moment Alexander walked toward her and understood something. At the time, she thought he had found her. But the truth was different. Alexander did not find Emily. He simply reminded her that she was still there. The real Emily had never disappeared. She had only been buried beneath years of expectations, fear, and the desire to make everyone else happy. And when she finally allowed herself to rise again, she discovered something more valuable than any relationship. She discovered her own voice, her own confidence, her own life. So if there is one lesson we can take from Emily's story, perhaps it is this: never allow yourself to become a stranger in your own life just to keep someone else comfortable. Love should inspire you to become more of who you are, not less. A relationship should be a place where you are seen, not hidden, where your voice matters, not ignored, where you can grow, not disappear. Because at the end of the day, the most important person you will ever have a relationship with is yourself. And when you finally learn to see your own value, no one else's inability to recognize it can ever take it away from you. Thank you for staying with me through Emily's journey. If this story made you reflect on love, family, or the importance of valuing yourself, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Emily made the right choice by finally choosing herself? Or do you think some relationships deserve another chance when two people finally learn to understand each other? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring more emotional stories about family, relationships, and the moments that change people forever, subscribe to When Family Breaks One, because sometimes the stories that break our hearts are also the ones that teach us how to rebuild them. Kethuk. Final reflection. The moment you choose yourself again. Emily's story is not simply about a woman who was ignored by her husband or a person from the past who returned at the perfect moment. It is a story about something far more universal: the quiet journey of losing yourself and the courage it takes to find yourself again. For many years, Emily believed that being a good wife meant sacrificing more, understanding more, and asking for less. She believed that keeping a family together required her to hide her pain and silence her own needs. But over time, she discovered a painful truth. A person can give everything to a relationship and still feel completely unseen. The greatest heartbreak in life is not always losing someone else. Sometimes, it is losing yourself while trying so hard to keep someone else. Emily's transformation began when she stopped asking, "How can I make everyone else happy?" and finally started asking, "What do I need to feel alive again?" That question changed everything. Because true healing does not begin when someone else recognizes your value. It begins when you recognize it yourself. Alexander's return did not save Emily. He did not magically repair the years she had lost. Instead, he reminded her of the person she had always been, someone with dreams, confidence, and a voice that deserved to be heard. And that is the message we can take from Emily's journey. No matter how many years have passed, no matter how many mistakes have been made, and no matter how far you feel from the person you used to be, you always have the ability to reconnect with yourself. Your past may explain your story, but it does not have to control your future. A healthy relationship should not make you feel invisible. The people who truly love you should not ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. They should encourage you to grow, support your dreams, and appreciate the person you are. Because love is not about losing yourself in another person. Love is about two people who choose to stand together while still remaining whole. Deep lessons and how we can apply them today. 1. Never abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Compromise is necessary in any relationship, but constantly ignoring your own feelings creates emotional exhaustion. Take time to ask yourself, am I happy with who I am becoming? Am I being respected and valued? Am I living my life or only fulfilling someone else's expectations? Your happiness matters too. 2. Communicate before emotional distance becomes permanent. Many relationships do not break because love disappears. They break because people stop sharing what they truly feel. Do not wait until resentment becomes impossible to repair. Express your needs. Share your thoughts. Have honest conversations. Sometimes one sincere conversation can prevent years of silent pain. 3. Remember that your worth does not depend on someone else's approval. People may overlook your effort, They may fail to appreciate your sacrifices. They may not see everything you do. But their inability to recognize your value does not change your value. You are worthy because of who you are, not because of what you provide. 4. It is never too late to begin again. A new chapter does not require a perfect past. You can rebuild confidence. You can rediscover forgotten passions. You can create a life that feels meaningful. The most important step is being brave enough to take the first one. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Emily made the right choice by choosing herself? Or do you believe she should have tried harder to save her marriage? Please share your opinion in the comments below. Your perspective may inspire others and create a meaningful conversation. If you enjoyed this emotional story about family, love, relationships, and the journey of finding yourself again, please subscribe to @WhenFamilyBreaks1. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating more powerful and meaningful stories in the future.